about self-compassion. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Daniel. My background's in psychology. I studied at Stellenbosch University. I'm always plugging them in my presentations. Then I also studied at the University of Queensland. My background is focused on teaching mental and psychological skills. And I've been in the NPO sector for a while, and most recently doing this Psyche innovations, making mental health accessible. Then, funnily enough, I met Emilia at the American Psychological Association. So it's really cool that an American organization brought together a Romanian and a South African. But that's just how life goes. Okay, so who is our guest speaker? Emilia is a psychotherapist with a master's degree in clinical psychology. She has extensive experience in digital mental health solutions. She's conducted research and worked with a whole bunch of different startups as a consultant and as a content creator. Emilia's done an internship at the European Commission focused on digital policies and funding, and she remains actively involved in mental health advocacy, following her role as an advocacy coordinator for the European Federation of Psychological Student Associations. So, very cool, impressive person. So what we'll be talking about today is just briefly who and what and Psyche Innovations is and does. And then we'll jump straight into self-compassion, our topic for today. And then we'll go through 3 activities: letter to my inner critic, inner cheerleader, and a compassion break. So what is Psyche Innovations? We're all about making mental health accessible and affordable through teaching a holistic range of skills, self-compassion being one of those. And the skills are designed to be real-world applicable and something that everyone can use, and also being evidence-based, hence getting experts in like Emilia to help us. So we focus on the 8 core domains of mental health and wellness, and those very quickly are flourish, that's about personal growth, and optimism, peace, that's mindfulness and spirituality, connection, that's your social skills and sense of acceptance, mood, that's your ability to manage your emotions and emotional intelligence, resilience, that's your coping skills, focus is creativity and problem solving, mastery is your sense of self-worth, and then physical being your physical wellness, sleep, exercise, that kind of stuff. So in the app, we help people measure these core domains so that they can decide to learn skills and competencies that are appropriate to them. So today we're doing self-compassion. So as I said before, please leave comments. We'd love to hear what you have to say. We'd love to interact with them. Please really lean into that. And without further ado, what is self-compassion, Emilia? Please.
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for the kind words. Really glad to be here with everyone and discuss this concept, which is very, very dear to me. And yeah, let's try to dive into it and understand what self-compassion actually is and how we can practice this more. And I'll first start by talking about what compassion is. And I was just looking up the definition online before joining this webinar, and I'm quoting from this: compassion means literally to suffer together. And it's that feeling that you have when you see that someone is going through a hard time, and you have this urge to go towards them and show your support, show them that you're there for them, show them that you are trying to help them overcome the hardship that they're going through. And that can manifest through maybe a kind word, a gentle touch on their shoulder, maybe giving a hug, or even sitting down and trying to look for solutions to the actual problem causing that person to feel in a negative way. Now, going back to self-compassion, it literally means taking all that and directing it towards yourself. It means that you are trying to treat yourself kind when you are going through difficult times. Right. I remember when I first got introduced to this concept that it sounded so strange to me that I would be the person being kind towards myself and showing myself support and understanding like something wasn't right. It didn't sound like something that I would normally or naturally do. And I'm sure that this is the same for many people in the audience. It sure has been the same for many of my colleagues, for many of the people that I have worked with. So it's a normal thing because we're not necessarily taught how to be compassionate towards ourselves while growing up. It's rather encouraged that we are, well, being slightly more critical, so to say. In order to understand self-compassion, it helps to break it down into three key components. So the first one would be self-kindness, which is literally trying to be more gentle towards yourself instead of harshly criticizing you anytime something doesn't go as planned or anytime you make the slightest mistake. The second component would be common humanity, and that means that you understand everyone is going through a hard time at one point in their lives. Everybody is making mistakes. Everyone is suffering to some extent, and we're all connected in this suffering. So therefore, we are not alone, and that helps take quite a bit of pressure off of ourselves. And the last component is mindfulness, which implies that when you are going through a difficult moment, you recognize that this is a moment of suffering, and you recognize your critical voices popping up. And that helps distance yourself from the difficult situation. Mindfulness within the concept of self-compassion means that you differentiate between your person and your worth as a person and the difficult situation you're going through and whatever that might come with. So it's not, you're not the sum of the things happening to you. You're more than that, and you recognize that in the difficult situation.
Emilia, I'm curious, why is knowing that other people are struggling with self-compassion, that sort of common humanity aspect that you talked about, so important?
There are many reasons here, and there are many mechanisms behind this component of common humanity. First off, when you are being hard on yourself, when you're going through a difficult situation, it's very likely that you have this tendency to believe that this is only happening to you, and that is very linked to your worth as a person. So you are going through this difficult situation or something bad happened to you because you deserve it, and it's only because you weren't good enough, and it's maybe even some sort of punishment. And when you take a step back and you recognize that, well, it's definitely unpleasant, I will definitely have to deal with this, but wait, so many other people are going through this, so maybe there's nothing fundamentally wrong with me since so many people are going through this thing. And of course, the same experience won't look the same for everyone, that for sure, but there are common elements. And then when you recognize this, it can be really powerful in understanding that this is fine and this is normal. Although unpleasant, this is normal.
That's awesome. I thought we'd try one of our banner questions, which I think is such a brilliant question when we start thinking about self-compassion. And that's that question of how would you treat a close friend who is struggling? And I'll just leave that there, and I hope everyone starts putting some comments in for us. Emilia, how does self-compassion help us?
In several ways. I cannot emphasize this enough. This is actually a well-established concept. It's something that we try and build in therapy, and it's really backed by a lot of science. So there's a lot of research showing that increasing this skill, practicing self-compassion actively, can help us on a bunch of different levels and in many ways. First off, it really helps ease stress and anxiety. It helps us cope with our emotions much better. And that is first off because of this component of distancing ourselves from the things we're going through and from the things we are feeling. And then when we accept that this is something that is common and this is something that has happened to us, but it doesn't define us, we are more able to deal with the situation causing the difficult emotions and the difficult whatever outcomes that we might be facing. Self-compassion also helps boost recovery, and that is because when when we recognize that everyone is struggling, that this doesn't define us, again, we're really more able to try and work around what is causing the problem and what is causing us to feel in a negative way. We are much more able to bounce back from adversity when we're practicing self-compassion. It helps build self-esteem, and this is probably one of my favorite, let's say, side effects of practicing self-compassion. Besides the fact that it actively helps us cope with the problem at hand, it also helps us feel better about ourselves. And that is because it encourages us to accept the things that maybe didn't go as planned. It helps us accept our flaws, but it also shifts the focus towards the things that we're good at, our strengths, our qualities, things when things that others appreciate about us, and then we learn to appreciate those things about ourselves as well. It also maybe helps us think of past situations when we have successfully dealt with a similarly difficult situation as in the present moment. So it helps us remind us of, let's say, our wins, and not focus so much on what went wrong.
100%. I actually really benefited from the self-esteem element of it today, because when we were practicing this, you were talking about, and I'm skipping ahead to some of the juicy bits later, but you were talking about how sort of like touching yourself, and comforting yourself can be really beneficial. And I had to do a presentation today, and I was tired, and I had to go on stage. And when I was actually in the car, I remember you saying that, and I had that moment of like, hey, you got this, it's fine, be kind to yourself, and it's just funny that you taught that yesterday.
That's really great. That's really great. And it's really in the small moments then that you manage to practice it just a little bit. You don't have to go through all the steps, but just a little bit of flexibility there, and you can already feel such a big difference. So I'm really glad it worked for you.
Thanks. I think sometimes when we talk about these skills, like, I think people can get caught up in like all the details of all these different things that you can do, and sometimes it's just a small little thing. Like in that moment, I was like, oh yeah, Emilia taught me this thing, and yeah, it was super cool. So all right, keep going. What
No,
else?
really glad you shared, and this is really valuable. So I'm really happy it worked for you. Let me just quickly go over some other benefits of self-compassion, so such as improving coping. This goes well hand in hand with what I've already mentioned regarding the benefits of self-compassion. And I want to underline here that self-compassion doesn't mean giving up, but it's rather a kinder way of dealing with certain issues. And what you see in practice is that when you get unhooked from the critical voices in your head, you actually have more room to do something about it. And you're more likely to try and use healthy coping mechanisms. You are much likely to don't go down the same road of avoiding your feelings, of avoiding your problems, or overcompensating, or whatever other coping mechanisms that people might try and use, and well, not to the same benefit as much more healthier alternatives. It also promotes health quite to some extent, and especially mental health, but not only. I will touch mostly upon mental health, because when you're more compassionate towards yourself, you help reduce self-criticism, and that comes with much less shame, reduced feelings of anxiety, depression, self-criticism. It also really boosts mental health and our capacity to deal with everyday stress, and also with longer term, let's say, problems. So it really widens our, if you want to say, toolbox in dealing with these issues. And it's really shown in studies that this is an effective tool that you can use on a daily basis for this sort of issues. And lastly, self-compassion really helps improve our relationships. First, because when you are practicing compassion towards yourself, you're also more likely to be understanding towards others. But really, what I think is the key element here is that common humanity perspective. Because again, when in a difficult situation, our inner critic pops up. We get hooked to the critical voices in our head. We tend to think that this is only happening to us, that this is a horrible situation, that there's no way we can cope with it properly, or we're really only focusing on the issue regardless of whatever the voices in our head are telling us. And then we tend to disconnect. We tend to be very self-centered. At the same time, what we need the most in this kind of moments is connection, and is being seen, going towards others, letting others come towards us. And again, self-compassion here can be a very powerful help in this area.
That's awesome. So I see we got some comments in response to our question, and I'm just going to pop one of them up on the screen here. Kelsey said, I would try to be present and supportive to my struggling friend. I think it is really important to focus on listening rather than providing advice. That's so true. Admittedly, our question was supposed to be a bit of a trap, and you answered it so nicely. Because the question, how would you treat a close friend who is struggling? We created this trap because when we think of somebody else who's struggling, we're gentle and supportive with them. But when we talk to ourselves, we can often be quite critical when we're struggling. And it's kind of the hypocrisy that we have there. Is this something we see quite often with people, Emilia?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely something I see when I reflect on myself. It's definitely something that I see with my clients and other people that I have worked with. It's a very common thing that people do, and sometimes we don't realize it because it's so normalized that we treat ourselves a bit harsher, that we and we put a badge of honor on it, right? Because it's like saying, well, but I want to be the best. I want to improve myself. I want to prevent making mistakes, or I want to fix something that I don't like. Well, right. But as I was saying, self-compassion doesn't mean giving up. It's just a nicer way of dealing with the things that don't work as well, or especially with the things that are outside of your control. So, for example, if a dear friend would come to me telling that something awful has happened to them, or they're really stressed at work or at school, I'm not going to tell them, well, but that's all right, because you have to just work more, or you have to be better, and it's all up to you, and stop complaining because that makes you weak.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how would my friend feel if I said that to this person?
Yeah, they wouldn't stay friends with you, right?
Most likely, and they would probably be right about it. So
So I think it's a good segue into the next one. I see Leonie also gave us a comment here. Let me just read it. It's a nice one. Also nurtures a deeper, more loving relationship with others. I guess that's the context of the benefits of self-compassion, and that's so true. When we are more compassionate to ourselves, it's easier to be compassionate to others. And I like to talk from personal experience, and I was talking on stage again today about emotional intelligence and understanding one's own emotions. And how can we understand others and be compassionate to others sometimes if we're not compassionate to ourselves and care for ourselves? There's this duality where we're sort of hypocritical.
yeah.
And yeah, it's a beautiful comment there. Tell us about Letter to My Inner Critic.
Right. A very nice activity, which I am also practicing, and it has helped me a bunch. This is a very nice way to get more into self-compassion. And it's also a very nice way of understanding why we need self-compassion. Because we're all talking to ourselves, right? That's happening every day, no matter what, and especially in the most difficult situations. And if you actually try and analyze what we're telling ourselves, you'll find that it's most often kind of nasty things and very critical sentences, or very, I don't know. It's wild out there. You can meet many examples, interesting examples. And when we doubt our abilities, when we are challenging our worth as a person, that's our inner critic talking. And this is a very powerful exercise to actually try and maybe reduce some of this criticism coming from within. First off, it's very important to say that we're not going to get rid of our self-criticism. And it also it serves a function, right? Because we have this inner voice telling us that we should be better, we should try more, we should work harder, we should meet our goals, we should try and prevent making mistakes, and that's all good stuff, right? But sometimes this criticism can become too harsh and too much, and it can be overwhelming, and it can actually get in the way of us living a full, meaningful life. It can get in the way of us meeting our goals, doing our work, and so on and so forth. So one way to maybe distance yourself from this critical voice is to try and see it as if it were a different person and have a dialogue with it. And this is exactly what this exercise does. It helps you identify what your critical voice sounds like. And then it helps you send it a message, like tone it down a bit and maybe teach it how you would like it to talk to you in those difficult moments. And I was mentioning that I have often done this exercise and I enjoy it very much. Again, it was very weird the first time I actually sat down with my inner critic and had this compassionate conversation, like, what was I doing? But trust me on that, give it a try. What you would want to do with this exercise is that you identify your inner critic. And for me, that sounded like you have to do your best. You have to work hard. You always have to do things perfectly, no matter what. Always think of all the possibilities. Always try to make the best decision. Making a mistake is unacceptable. So that's how my inner critic sounds like. And once I recognized it, I try to see how does it look like for me. And for me, my inner critic literally looked like an overprotective parent, always hovering above me and trying to prevent me from doing this mistake and pushing me to work harder on this direction and on this goal. And once I gave it this persona, I could see why my inner critic was doing that. And it was actually trying to help me to some extent, or so my inner critic was thinking. Anyway, I was able to identify the function. I was able to identify that there's a reason why we have our critical voices. And then I proceed to the next steps, which would be giving thanks.
Before you go to the next step, Emilia, how do we know when it's overly critical? Like, how do we know what's a healthy amount of inner critic to motivate us and when it's starting to stifle us and be oppressive, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, because I think if you ask most people, they would say that they have a healthy amount of self-criticism and that it's actually helpful. I mean, I think it depends, of course, from person to person. But I think if your critical voice sounds something like, I always have to be the best, I can never make mistakes. So if it speaks in these absolute terms, then that might be a red flag. If it tells you that you are only worthy of love and appreciation if you always work, or if you have no like countless achievements, that again might be a red flag. Because ideally you would respect yourself as a person regardless of your achievements. Of course, it makes you feel good when you achieve something, when you get a better job, when you get good results in school, when you have a lot of friends. But at the same time, these things change across the lifespan. So it's not always gonna be the case that we have the things we want or the things we think are important. So that's why if your self-worth depends on this kind of, like, let's say, achievements or outside factors, and your critical voice won't give you peace until you've achieved all of that, then that might be a sign that this is too much.
Okay, that's very helpful. And then the sort of inner critic you were talking about that you have, I was kind of nodding along going, well, I do that and I kind of think the same. Is it, do we all kind of have very similar inner critics, or do they vary quite a lot between people? Because when we're going through this, you're like, well, what would you name your inner critic? And I was thinking like, ooh, I don't know. don't want to think about that in too much detail, but is my inner critic going to look the same as yours and then the next person, or can they vary a lot? Is basically my question.
I mean, both are valid because they can vary in like the messages we can see on the surface. So my inner critic can say that I always have to be perfect and I always have to know it all. And your inner critic can say something like you have to work a lot and you have to always be busy. Otherwise, you're not doing enough. But eventually, if you dig deeper, it all stems from our core beliefs about ourselves, which can be something like, I'm not worthy enough as a person. And then the way I learn to build my worth is through overworking or through perfectionism. So eventually you can always dig kind of like the same voice if you really look underneath. Does that
That's
answer
awesome.
your question?
It does, but I think how we talk to ourselves and that inner critic is so ingrained in us in some like deep level that there's a part of me that thinks like, well, can I change that? Oh, you guys are teaching us this skill, like how long is it going to take? Can I really change it so that when these struggling moments come along, we're in difficult situations like we're trying to ask in this question, will it always be the same? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel?
I think this is the kind of question that would require a self-compassionate answer to it. Because we have created these critical voices and we have internalized them in years of practice. So up until this point, we have been picking from our environments, from the people around us, we have picked along the way all of these proofs that our inner critic is legit and that we need it in order to succeed, and that like we've been feeding these beliefs about ourselves. We've been feeding this belief that we are flawed or that we're not good enough, we're not worthy enough. And it's very likely that it's not going to go away. But then if you expect it to just magically go away, that's also your perfectionism talking. And you can actually practice self-compassion on your journey towards self-compassion. Maybe it sounds weird, but as we go through these exercises, you will probably notice that they don't come natural to us. And that is because criticizing ourselves, criticizing each other is so ingrained in our cultures, regardless of where we come from. It's going to be there one way or another, and we're going to internalize it to some extent. So it's always going to follow us. But what we can do is that we can try and create an alternative. And rather than feeding our inner critic from this point forward, we can try and feed that much healthier alternative, which again, doesn't mean we're giving up, doesn't mean we don't want to improve ourselves. It's just that we give each other, we give each other and then we give ourselves more encouragement rather than criticism. And we try and work towards our goals in a much more productive manner rather than always beating ourselves up for whatever we don't like. Or
Wow, that's awesome. I have so many more questions, but if I keep asking you questions, we're not going to move forward. So tell us about the thanking.
Right. This is a very tricky component, right? Because we identify our inner critic, okay. Then we try and see what it actually wants from us. We can maybe guess that it's there to help us, but then how can we actually thank it if it's criticizing us this much? Well, this is going to be a challenging step, but it's also a very powerful one, because we are showing compassion to ourselves basically in this moment. So if I go back to my example, to my inner critic that was always trying to control my every move, my every decision, telling me I have to be perfect, I would tell my inner critic something along the lines of, I can see you care about me. I can see you want me to do well. I can see you want the best for me. Thank you for that. I appreciate your effort. And this feels very good. Trust me on that. This feels very good because you're literally talking to yourself. So that feels very reassuring. It makes you feel seen, and it makes you, it makes you feel understood. Maybe that's the best way to put it in my case while doing this exercise.
Yeah, because I guess in some ways that inner critic has tried to be protective, and like you said, it's thinking it's helping us in some cases, but surely it feels kind of a bit weird to and how do I thank it for it's how it's tried to help me even though it hasn't always been healthy. What does thanking it look like, if that makes sense?
But you're doing both. So you're thanking it for what it tries to do, but that doesn't mean you accept how it actually does those things. So in my case, if I go back to my example, I would tell my inner critic, well, thank you for always looking out for me. Thank you for always pushing me to do my best. However, you can be a bit much at times. So maybe let's try and see what we can do differently. And you move on to the next step. You move on to the replace step or the alternative voice. You tell your inner critic what you would actually like to hear in those moments, in those difficult moments. After I thank my inner critic for always being there for me, always pushing me to be my best, always looking out for me, I can tell my inner critic, maybe sometimes you can give me more freedom. Let's try to be more flexible next time when I have to make a decision. Because up until this point, I don't think I've disappointed you. So I'm sure things will go great, or at least it won't be a disaster if you give me more freedom. Take a vacation. You can literally tell your inner critic, go take a vacation. You've done enough. You've worked so hard at trying to improve me, at trying to always push me harder. Take a vacation. You deserve it. It's my way of thanking you. And yeah, whatever, you can be creative, you can always find something. And my experience is that it will come once you give this exercise a chance. Things will come.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Michael's given us a nice a comment here, and it kind of makes me think of what I wanted to say as well. It said, my inner critic varies with the context. It's more strict with certain things, kinder with others. And I completely relate to that because like in some context, like if I'm exercising and I go for a run, I don't think I'm overly critical there. Like if I get tired and I slow down, I'm gentle with myself. But I think in some work contexts that like you're not working hard enough, you haven't achieved enough, that can come in at times, and it pushes me to exhaustion. So I think I really relate to what Michael's saying, and that I need to be kinder to myself in some of those situations. But I guess there's also like a weird, and this is going to sound super unhealthy, but there's like this fear that like if I replace it, like I say thank you and I try to get rid of it, what will be there? And that sounds so weird to say that about something that hasn't been kind to me.
Right, right. Yeah, both are great points. And maybe I'll start off with what you said last, that you feel insecure letting go of your criticism. It's not like we're not intending to put something back. It's not like we're just going to leave you without, I don't know, a mechanism to motivate you or something of the sorts. But it's true that it feels very familiar, even when it's something negative. So it's really hard, and it can induce a lot of anxiety to try to change our ways. And this is very common, actually. Regardless of what you work on in therapy, anytime you try to change some patterns, it's always going to raise some resistance because it's something that is familiar, right? But at the same time, it's not like we're not putting something in place. And now regarding the comment that we got, well, that's also a good thing, because it would be quite catastrophic if you would be self-critical towards every little aspect of your life. And it's actually something that you can use. We all have our pain points. And we can work on our pain points by extracting from the things that we are good at, the things that we are less critical with ourselves while doing those. We can try and figure what our strengths are. Again, some past instances where um, we performed well or we've achieved something. We can use those as evidence to build a healthier alternative to our inner critic.
Yeah, that's so good. I try to do that. Like, hey, you've done this in the past. It's fine. You can do it again. Or like, you've come so far. You didn't fail all those times. Like, you're still here. Like, it's not the end of the world. I'm just gonna put some of these comments up. This is such a good question. Does one's inner critic spill over or influence how others perceive you? That's targeted at you, Emilia. You're the expert here.
I mean, I guess here the answer is that it depends on how it looks like and how obvious it is. A lot of us are really good at hiding it, and it's always when we talk to ourselves in our head that this voice shows up. At the same time, it's very common that when you have really high standards for yourself, you also have these high standards towards others. And then that impacts your interactions, and especially in a work-related environment, but not necessarily. It can also be in a social environment, that the same standards you apply towards yourself, you apply towards others. And then others perceive you as more critical or hard to get along with or just an impossible person. So yeah, I mean, this has happened to me, for example. It has been the case. Now I've worked on that, but it's true. And it depends on what is your pain point again, like what is that area where your critic is most active.
Yeah.
But it
And
can
it's
happen.
crazy how it kind of like bubbles over, right? Because if I'm super critical about something like work, for example, I set like a maybe unrealistic expectation for myself, then I can apply that to other people. And then they're like, whoa, where's that coming from? But it's my own issue. And I think that kind of plays into to that comment. If you're critical self-talk takes you to a certain place to behave in a certain way in certain situations, I think it can influence other people. Like if I heavily criticize myself all the time and it affects my self-worth and self-esteem, and I really start to believe these things, then I start acting out those beliefs in the real world, you know? And it can work both ways. If I'm really supportive and I'm kind to myself and I'm at peace with myself, like people will pick up on that as well, I imagine. So I don't know if you agree or disagree with me there, Emilia, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, we can discuss this on and on, but everything is basically possible.
I see Leonie has another comment for us here before we move on. I say the following to my inner critic: thank you for sharing that with me, but Leonie chooses to believe.
Mhm.
Ah, I
Yeah,
love that. That's so
very
great.
very nice phrasing. Yes, indeed, because you have a choice, and sometimes you really have to take yourself less seriously. Yeah. So that's, yeah, thank you for sharing. This is a very, very nice way of putting it.
So what does our letter look like?
Well, when doing this exercise, you have to first identify what your inner critic sounds like or even looks like. It's really helpful to, as I was saying, give it a persona and try to see it as if it were a different person. It's much more easier to actually give yourself permission to write those things, to give thanks, to be accepting, to suggest an alternative. And it's basically you write whatever you want. You write however you feel like. You can put more emphasis on some aspects. You can um, try to be more assertive toward your inner critic. So literally anything you want. Give yourself permission to explore here. And what I want to say again is that this exercise can also work really well in a day-to-day situation. So when you don't have time to sit down and write, you can just try to picture your inner critic as a, I don't know, funny thing, as a funny person, or Yeah, and try to acknowledge that this is my inner critic at work. I'll just let it be here.
That's awesome. I think another question I have is like, this kind of work, this inner work of looking at my inner critic can feel daunting. How do I, like, how do I just, like I rock up at gym and I'm in my gym clothes and I know I'm ready to exercise. Like, how do I just like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this. How do I do that? Is that a strange question? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I think this is gonna become clearer with the next exercises, maybe.
Okay.
Because
Fair enough.
there are many components to it.
Okay, cool. Should I keep going, Emilia?
Yes, you can take over, and while you do that,
Sweet.
I'm gonna quickly plug in my computer. But you have the floor now.
Okay, so Inner Cheerleader. It's pretty self-explanatory from the topic or the title, what that means. What is our inner cheerleader? How does it look? And to challenge our negative thoughts with positive inner talk, right? Or positive self-talk. And we all do this in some small way, but what I often think about is, what's the balance? What proportion of our inner talk is this critical self-talk, and what percentage is, this inner cheerleader that's motivating and uplifting and brings a new perspective to things. And I think Emilia's first idea and activity of noticing that criticism was super helpful for me, because I spent a little bit of time over the past few days trying to flesh it out for myself, and also think about the different situations in which that critical self-talk came up. And then I thought, okay, well, what would the replacement look like? What would instead of the, like, if there's a persona to this inner critic and there's this little goblin thing that's like, oh, Daniel, blah, 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 blah. What does the inner cheerleader look like? There's a little like Daniel with pom-poms. And what would he say, and how would he say it to me? And it felt super nice to write these inner cheerleader sort of like comments and quotes and stuff. And it can feel cheesy at times to think like, oh, they just do it, or, like the Nike slogan for, getting yourself to keep going. But, obviously you hit that and you're like, well, that's cheesy. But what do I really want to tell myself when things get tough? And sometimes it's not always, like, for me at least, a thing I say to myself. Sometimes it's somebody I think of, or a place or whatever, and that just helps me keep going in these moments where I need that inner cheerleader. And I try to be intentional about it, especially because when you're in the thick of things, I think it's tougher. Like I keep going back to this presentation I did this morning, but I got there super early, so I had an hour to kind of like mentally prep myself, and it gave me the chance to walk around and actually psych myself up with this sort of like inner cheerleader, positive self-talk approach. And it really helped me. I don't know if you have sort of like personal experience, Emilia, with using inner cheerleader and how it looked and how it worked for you.
I think the answer here is that it looked inconsistent, because sometimes I manage, sometimes I don't. Again, going back to what we were saying previously, these are messages that we've internalized for a long time, and they're very strong. So again, this is a good chance to practice self-compassion while getting better at self-compassion. So while doing these exercises. In my case, I don't know, I might be doing something very randomly and then realize that I have this high expectation of myself. Or I might not even be aware of the thoughts that I have in my head, but I just realize that I'm very tense, right, in my body. And then I start to think, okay, why is this happening? What is going on through my head? And then I can identify that my inner critic has been activated, and I try to tone it down. The way I do it most of the time is that I try to be more flexible. I try to take a more flexible outlook on the situation that I'm currently in. So, for example, if I'm faced with a decision, I can tell myself something along the lines of, "There's no way you can make the perfect choice. Nobody could do this instead of you. Nobody can make the perfect decision. So it's fine. Just pick whatever feels right." Or if I'm trying to maybe fix a mistake, I can tell myself, okay, this has happened. It's normal. This happens. It's not the end of the world. Let me see what I can do better next time. So it's not extreme positivity. No, it's more of a flexible answer. It's more of a flexible alternative, taking into account both the things that went well and the things that could be improved, both my strengths and, again, things that could be improved. It's a mix of everything. It's supposed to be a balanced alternative.
That's awesome. I love the two things you said there. So, how do you notice when it's happening? And I guess for me, it's a bit reactive. Like, I notice I'm stressed and there's a heaviness on me and I'm like physically anxious. And then I realize I've left things a bit late. So I need to be more proactive with this inner cheerleader, this positive self-talk. And then the other thing you said was so good. Like, there's no perfect, like outcome here that, and I think I do that. I think a lot of us do that. Is like we expect, unless it goes perfectly, it was a failure. Unless I did like everything the way I had planned it in my head, which nobody knows is going on in your head, that it somehow didn't work. And I experienced this with somebody a while ago. They were telling a joke, and then they stopped halfway through the joke, and they were like, "Oh no, I ruined it." And I was like, "But you haven't. We're already laughing. You just haven't completed your joke." And that was so funny that like we do that, is we have these expectations of how things are meant to pan out, and then when it doesn't fulfill this perfect idea, we criticize ourselves.
Right. And this goes very well with one comment or question that we got previously regarding how our inner critic influences how others perceive ourselves, because it's there and it's happening, and it impacts our interactions, it impacts our performance in certain situations. So actually being slightly less judgmental can help you and can help improve all of these aspects in your life. But yeah, this example with the joke is really point on. Yeah, it's really what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I wonder if the comments keep coming through about what kinds of things does the voice in your head say? Mine says so many things, and I'm probably too honest in these webinars. So I'd love to hear from some of you. So the reflection here is about, changing "I'm not good enough" to "I have my own strengths," and, coming up with affirmations that feel right to you. And when Emilia and I were talking about this before, I'm often like, "Oh, I did this inner critic activity once. Like, why isn't it gone now? Why isn't it perfect? Like, why haven't I changed 'I'm not good enough' to 'I have my own strengths,' like overnight?" And
Right.
it takes time, because we built this foundation of this inner critic, and we fed it and fed it and fed it until it's this big bloated thing, and now we want it to disappear overnight. And being intentional about getting it to go in the right direction can be tough. There's this Native American story don't know where this is coming from, but it's kind of like making me think of it about the two wolves in your life. And in short, they talk about, the good wolf, the healthy wolf, the kind of like ideal version of yourself, and then like this bad wolf, all the toxic ideas and violence and all those things. And they're fighting sort of like for your soul and who you are. And the stories of this like boy asking this elder, well, which wolf wins in the end? And the elder simply asks, responds, the one you feed more. And I really like that because like, which one's going to win, your inner critic or this inner cheerleader? And it's the one you feed more, that you support more, that you put more time towards. And if you're doing like great and you watch this and you're like, Daniel's talking about this inner critic, I've never had that. I had a friend talk about the stress management webinar we did, and he was like, nope, I don't really struggle with stress. And that's great. Maybe none of you or some of you don't have this inner critic, and others, all they feel is this inner critic. And I guess what we're trying to talk about and be honest with, and Emilia is giving sort of cool tips about, is to just move that needle slowly in the right direction.
Right. So it's a matter of perspective sometimes, and it takes time, and it's a skill, right? Because we're building the skill, and that's what this is all about. Why we've prepared all these exercises, because it's really training an alternative and really feeding this other wolf a bit more than we have fed the inner critic. And it takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes active discovery of the things that you like, the things that you value, things you're good at. But it's not like it's impossible.
100%. So I'd love to hear some of your comments. I put up another question. What affirmations could you use to challenge your negative thoughts? I'll leave that up there as Emilia takes us through a compassion break.
In the meantime, we received another comment, and maybe this would be valuable to share before this exercise, from Jessie.
Oh, of course. Let's put it up there.
Saying how her inner critic is looking like in a situation when doing a new activity, and not meeting the expectations that we set for ourselves. This is already like I'm talking from experience. Trying to focus on what that new experience taught us for the first time. That's a good thing. That's a very nice and useful way of putting it, or of shifting this perspective. Exactly what we've been mentioning. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Josie. See, we have another one here. My inner critic often asks the question, why? As in, why did you do that? Ooh, that's a tough one. I love that.
Does it also ask, you should have known, or say you should have known better, or you should have already been good at this? Or because mine does. So again, this is very common. And I think this is also very powerful, sharing these examples, because we are exercising our common humanity here and seeing that we basically have the same struggles to some extent.
Yeah, for sure. See, Leonie has another comment here. We can certainly feed and amplify our inner cheerleader with daily affirmations, gratitude, and self-compassion. So true. So true.
Right. And speaking of self-compassion, let's dive into a very practical way of putting everything together. So this compassion break exercise is a very nice way of bringing all the components in one powerful tool that you can use at any time. This is particularly useful when you're in the heat of the moment, so when you feel really overwhelmed, but you can always practice it as you go through your day. You don't have to wait until you're in a very critical spot to actually take this compassion break. What it actually means, what it implies, it's an exercise to calm your inner critic, and to show kindness to yourself. And it has a few steps, 3 steps. If you can go to the next slide, I think we have them there. This is when you sit down, take a deep breath, close your eyes if you're able to, and try to talk to yourself as you would talk to a dear friend who's going through a difficult moment. I always think of this example, like, for example, if we have parents in the audience, you can think of how you would talk to your child when they're going through a difficult moment, when they feel discouraged, when they feel overwhelmed. This exercise basically implies that we direct that kind of talk, we direct that kind of action towards ourselves. You can think of a difficult situation, or when you are in a difficult situation, just try to be aware of what you're feeling. And what you want to do is take a few deep breaths and acknowledge, first off, that this is a moment of suffering, right? You acknowledge that you're going through something difficult. And you say that to yourself. You say these words that this is hard and it's okay. This is a moment that is unpleasant. This is awful. You can just, whatever goes through your head, whatever the situation is, just allow yourself to acknowledge that this is hard. Literally, that this is hard. Admit that to yourself. It's going to be very relieving already from this step, trust me. Then the next part would be to show support to yourself, because remember, how would you treat someone dear to you going through a difficult moment? You might want to reach out to some extent. You might want to give them a hug. You might want to give them a warm, gentle touch. And you can do that to yourself as well. I think I was telling you yesterday when we were discussing this, that you can maybe touch your chest, like you can lay a hand on your chest, and it's already, as I do this, it's already calming me down. Or I don't know, if you're out in public and you don't want people around you to notice that you're doing this exercise, you can just gently touch your hand. So for example, I don't know if you can see this, but I do this sometimes, like gently stroking my fingers. And that helps me. You can find your own thing. You can try to look at something pleasant. You can try to smell something nice. Whatever it is that might help you calm down and might help you um, feel that you're giving yourself the care that you need and you deserve. And or lastly, I think what goes really well here is that you say to yourself that everyone goes through these things. You recognize that this is a common experience to all humans, and you can tell yourself that it's okay to feel this way. Everybody goes through a hard time, but literally tell these words to yourself. Practice this as many times as possible. Sit with this exercise for as long as you need, but even a little bit of it can be really powerful. Like in your example, Daniel, when you have just a small moment to practice, and you maybe only touched upon one component and it already made a difference. So again, sit with this exercise for as long as you need, but if you feel like you don't have the time or you're not in the right place, still try to give it a chance, even with the smallest bit.
That's awesome. What I think about sometimes is like a small child. If a small child was super upset and overwhelmed after they'd like struggled with something, like how would like that paternal or caring instinct or whatever, you'd want to pick them up and comfort them and be like, it's okay, you can try again tomorrow. And I try to like channel that energy with myself to be kind, supportive, and non-judgmental. You wouldn't like, oh no, you didn't, succeed, you're a failure, to like a 5-year-old that's trying to like learn to ride a bike or something. So I try to think of that version of myself, and what would I want to hear in those moments where I'm struggling. And sometimes it's a small thing, like, there's tomorrow, or we can try again. And it takes time. Emilia, we have taken a lot of time to go through all of this, so I think we should wrap up to respect everybody's time. So basically, we went through what Psyche Innovations is and does. We talked, or Emilia and I talked at length about self-compassion, how it helps. We went very briefly through 3 activities of, noticing and acknowledging your critical inner talk and how you can try to slowly replace it, what your inner cheerleader might look like and how you can slowly build that, making time and spaces for compassionate breaks. I see Jesse has a comment here. I usually say you're strong, you can get through this. And I really like that. That's such a cool comment to close off on. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, and a very special thank you to Emilia, all the way from Romania. Please reach out to her if you have more questions. She's an expert on so many different things. We're very grateful to have her. And thanks again, everyone, for coming. We had a great time. I learned so much. I hope you did as well. Cheers for now. Thank you, Emilia.
Thank you too. This has been great. And I hope it really added some value to people.
Thanks very much. Cheers, everyone.
Bye.